Welcome to the Comics Arts Conference, and welcome to WonderCon itself. The Comics Arts Conference is a little different from what you will see at a lot of other panels at these conventions. How many of you have been to a Comics Arts Conference panel before? All right, so a few of you know what we do. Others among you are going to be like, why are we still talking? This is a scholarly conference within the convention. Founded more than 20 years ago by Pete there at the end, and Randy Coogan. Randy Coogan? No, he's Peter Coogan and Randy Duncan. I am Dr. Travis Langley, obviously. I'm sorry, off my date card. And Kate McClancy is the current organizer of the Comics Arts Conference. Alan is here.
What else needs to be said?
These panels, we go deeper in depth looking at some of the issues. In some cases, we're psychologically analyzing characters, analyzing what they are, the impact, the cultural relevance. So we have a lot of different things we do within the conference, but this is not where you come for, oh, what are the hot new things coming out of DC Comics this summer? No, that's not here. And even those panels don't really reveal anything. You can't just read on IO9. And so I welcome you. Our topic today, what is a supervillain? I am Dr. Travis Langley, best known as the author of the book Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night, the best book on Batman ever written by me. By that logic, so far, the worst book on Batman ever written by me. And I'm the editor and lead writer on a lot of other stuff, which all result from me being involved with these conferences. Alan, who are you?
Hey, I'm Alan Kistler. I'm a writer, a script doctor, and a comic book pop culture historian. And I wrote these books, the Unofficial Spider-Man Trivia Challenge, the Unofficial Batman Trivia Challenge, the Unofficial Game of Thrones Cookbook, and Doctor Who in History, which is a New York Times bestseller for the week. That was fun. I also contribute to a bunch of the Psych Geek books that Travis edits, such as WonderCon Psychology and Captain America vs. Iron Man. And I've spent about 10 years now professionally writing about the evolution of these characters, as well as their morality, their psychological growth, and representation of women and minorities and LGBT within them. And right now I'm going more for narrative and working on video games.
And I'm Kate McClancy, and I don't have any books. I am a professor of media studies in the English department at Texas State University. I do, however, write articles, very long and dry and boring articles about comics. Most recently, I had one come out in image text on Captain America and Winter Soldier, which is not behind a paywall, so you can Google that right now. But yeah, I work on kind of the ways in which media forms influence the stories that they contain.
Do I get a slide? It's your turn.
Do I get a slide?
Oh, he wants to slide up now.
I'm Peter Coogan, or Dr. Peter Coogan, if that makes you feel better. I teach comics and visual culture at Washington University in St. Louis. I authored Superhero, The Secret Origin of Genre, or the way one of my students put it, you literally wrote the book on superheroes. And What is a Superhero? With Dr. Robin Rosenberg. And this kind of what is panel sort of emerges and has emerged out of those discussions. And that book has both professionals and academics contributing to it, so we get a nice broad scope.
Yeah, in both those books, you and other writers define superheroes, and you also define supervillains in a number of those throughout as well. So people who haven't written these books first, when you use the phrase supervillain, what does that mean? What is a supervillain?
Other than the breaking the law aspect, there has to be more, because frankly, the number of superheroes break the law. The number of times Batman is guilty of breaking and entering is staggering. But there's also got to be the goal, or at least the methods, are selfish. Sometimes the goal is actually not selfish, but the methods are selfish and very hypocritical. Characters like Magneto and such actually have a great argument, but then when you actually see their actions, like, oh, but you're killing a lot of people, aren't you? And so yeah, it's got to be something that while they say for the greater good, it's actually not, or it's such a singular vision that it doesn't include very understandable criticism and won't allow criticism or other factors to change it. It's a very strict idea of what they see as the big picture.
Oh, and I also has a slide for our other founder of the company. He's not here.
Forget it.
Pete, in print, you gave this definition of the supervillain, which I would argue is just you saying they're super and the villain.
Yes, that's the simpler definition, and it emerges out of my discussion of the superhero, because I consider the superhero to be a genre definition. So it's not just a hero who is a superhero, but a superhero. So there's no space in between. And that's mission, powers, and identity. And a supervillain, though, doesn't exactly reverse that. The supervillain does have an antisocial, selfish mission, and does have power, and often has an identity, but often not. So usually oftentimes they're just born with their identity, like Dr. Doom, that kind of thing. But here, this is the kind of simplest definition, but it's that idea of the superior or magnified. So it's not just a bad guy, it's something more. And then I get it, what is more?
You ran out that definition of what a superhero is. What is this? You talk about superhero and supervillain together in the book. You have to define them together. One way people look at they know who the supervillain is because they're the ones fighting the superhero. Okay, first, what is a superhero?
Are you going to put up the definition?
No, I didn't put the definition.
I mean, part of it is fashion.
I knew you would.
So, and I knew we'd get into this. So a superhero, again, there's two things. There's the hero who is super, or a superior hero, right? And that's anybody from Gilgamesh, Luke Skywalker, anybody who's both superior and good, doing good. But a superhero starts with Superman. Pro-social, selfless mission, right? That's the hero part. Has to be pro-social, has to be regarded as good by society. Has to be selfless, so they can't really be getting anything out of it, because being a hero is about sacrifice. Powers, that's extraordinary physical, mental, mystical, technological abilities, right, that enable the person to do more than what just a human being can do. And then identity, and this is the key one for the genre, it's code name and costume. Because you have a code name, Superman, Spider-Man, right, and a costume. If you put up Spider-Man against, I don't know, just a regular person standing there, you say, which one is Spider-Man? And you know. But put Daniel Craig in a tuxedo, is that James Bond? Not if he's in Road to Perdition. It's not. So the iconic nature of the superhero, especially as embodied by the chevron, the chest symbol, right? That has their whole sense of who they are, and it projects it. And that iconicity is important. And so you could reverse that for supervillain to make it antisocial and selfless. They have power. But then, there's a lot of supervillains that don't have that iconicity. Some don't have code names. They often do, but sometimes, like I said, it's just their names. And they often don't have costumes because the supervillain predates the superhero.
So pro-social mission, powers, identity. How's Batman a superhero?
Well, I didn't say, when I say powers, it's extraordinary abilities, right? So he's got the mission, right? Fight evil. He has training, extraordinary physical, mental, technological abilities, and then he clearly has the codename and costume, straight up.
He's also in a world where superheroes and time travel and aliens exist, and he doesn't have powers himself, but depending on which comic you read, he has spaceships and teleportation equipment.
So he has sci-fi toys.
Right.
So this is Iron Man. His powers are in these sci-fi toys.
Right. Yeah, he basically invents cold fusion and puts it in a suit.
So pro-social mission, powers, identity. Is that an adequate definition of superheroes?
Yes.
Done. As a broad stroke. There's always going to be exceptions or things that seem to cross genres.
No.
All right, so you, on the supervillains, you have your selfish mission. Do they have to have a mission?
They do, because if they don't have that sense of doing something, then, you know, they're just knocking over stores or something. They're not trying to accomplish
Why
something.
can't they just be knocking over stores and doing it really powerfully and in costume?
Well, there are, if we're going to get into the types later, there are what I call, you know, empowered thugs. You can take a superhero and just give them a bad attitude, and they become a supervillain because they have the other things, right? They have the powers and the identity. But typically, the thing about it's the superness of it. It's got to be beyond. It's got to be more, and that's where we get into things like the artist whose medium is crime.
Well, it's like along those lines, you know, there are supervillains who on the surface, they seem to be just after money. The Hobgoblin, the original Hobgoblin, was after money and had like sort of this set amount he wanted to steal, whether it's from straight up robbery or from taking over control of gangs. And once he hit that amount, he was going to retire. And indeed he did. But at the same time, he has equipment that allows him to fly through the air. He has gloves that can deliver electric blasts. He has chemicals that allow him to become strong enough to lift 10 tons. If money was truly the only goal, he could just sell that. He could mass produce, or he could sell to terrorists. He could go to another government. He could actually go to our government and just say, I know how to make this stuff now. Give me money, and have all these military contracts. And he doesn't. Like, there is this glory he wants to have. I did this for that, and I got to do this with a mask, and I got to give people something to be afraid of. It's not just the money.
So ego's an important part.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great line, Ming the Merciless. It's at the end of Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe, and Dr. Zarkov says, we must stop you. We're not only trying to save you, we're trying to Earth, we're trying to save the universe. And Ming looks at him and goes, I am the universe. Because the supervillain is so locked up into his ego, he is everything, right? Everything is seen through the prism of, it goes back to his wound. Supervillains have a wound that makes them turn inward and focus. Batman has a wound, but he turns outward. Superman has a wound, but he turns outward. Right? But Ming, he is everything to himself, and then the idea is they're sort of trying to make the rest of the world like them.
Well, I've got a question here. Like thinking about the kind of the selfishness and the inwardness, and also the kind of antisocialness and the hypocrisy. I was just teaching Watchmen a couple of weeks ago, and our class got into a conversation about whether Adrian Veidt is a supervillain, right? And the ways in which, like, he presents. If you guys, I'm sure the vast majority of this room is familiar with Watchmen, right? The way in which he presents his kind of mission as I'm here to save the world, right? Like I needed to drop a giant alien tentacle monster on New York and kill millions of people so that we
Common
could
version.
war, right? But like and you know, in the end, like, you know, Dan Dreiberg and Laurie and Dr. Manhattan all kind of agree, and they let Adrian Veidt like kind of go on his way. But there's also that panel where he's like kind of stands like celebrating his success, where he looks at all of his TV screens that he's got all scattered about, and he goes, "I did it!" Right?
He also wants them to know he did it.
Oh yeah.
He does want that audience.
Yeah.
Like as soon as Night Owl and Rorschach come in, he could just shoot them. He could take care of them. Like chances are, logically speaking, one of them's going to be trouble later.
Yeah.
But no, it's like I need an audience. Like I need to brag about what I just did. I need to say the lines I did it 35 minutes ago.
That's the
Like,
theatrical nature.
Yeah, exactly. Like I mean, and also he's wearing a damn costume while he's doing it. Like he's got this gold,
Yeah.
like silk thing. And
But
like,
he thinks
look at
he's a
me.
superhero. That's why he puts on the
Right.
costume. He's trying to assert that. But if you go back in the back matter and so forth, what happens with Ozymandias is the comedian beats him, right? Death fame. And that's it. He's going to tell a joke that's bigger than any joke the comedian ever tells. And at the end of Watchmen, Dan goes, "You're joking." He is joking, and Dan laughs. Dan laughed at Ozymandias' joke. Ozymandias wins.
There's a wonderful line from the Penguin in one particular comic book. What's the point in committing the perfect crime if no one knows it was you who did it?
Yeah.
And,
That's the Riddler every time.
and so that's the ego in these characters. There could be somebody with incredible superpowers that is stealing what they want, but they're not drawing attention to themselves. Could that person still be considered a supervillain if somebody finds out about them? They're trying not to have that identity. Would that be a supervillain?
I mean,
By these definitions.
I think that depends on how they respond once they are discovered. Like Shadow Thief had a pretty good thing going on where he became a shadow, stole stuff, and then got out of there, as befits his name. Then Hawkman showed up. He could have just taken the suit off. He could have moved to another city and said, all right, we're just going to try this again. But no, Hawkman interfered, so well, now this is a thing.
So once he was discovered, so he was Schrodinger's supervillain. There is, I'm a psychologist, and in my area, we overemphasize the worst in human nature, often neglect of looking at the better part. But we avoid some of the more personal descriptions, such as good and evil. Some psychologists are trying to make sense of what are these things that we think of as the worst part of human nature. They had the observations about what they call the Dark Triad, not the McDonald Triad, which that's the bedwetting and stuff for supposedly serial killers. The Dark Triad, 3 overlapping but not identical qualities that when you see all 3 of these in a person, they thought, okay, this is some of the worst of human nature. Later on, they realized they need to add one more. Narcissism, the ego, being very full of yourself. Machiavellianism, being manipulative. It's like you have somebody who's egotistical, but they're not a danger to anybody else. You have somebody who's egotistical and manipulating others, but maybe they're manipulating them for the sake of their good, to teach them all to do good things. Psychopathy is a term that's got numerous definitions, but what runs through them is that there's this lack of empathy for others. And it's inwardly, it has a lot of what you think of as the worst of human nature of being evil, if they act on it. And generally this combination, this phrase they use powerfully, agentic, meaning the person has agency in their own life. And agency in the lives of those around them. They're doing these things in ways that affect others. But somebody might fit all of those and apply them, for the right kind of mission. There's actually a term, the James Bond personality, for a high-functioning combination of the Dark Triad. So what had occurred to them later that they left out was somebody who takes these things and applies them for sheer cruelty. So they added sadism for a dark tetrad. So the manipulative, egotistical, sadistic psychopath. So they're full of themselves, they manipulate others, they're indifferent to your feelings, they don't care what you feel, and they delight in cruelty. Does this fit comic book villains pretty well? Does this fit the best ones, the most interesting ones?
I'd say many of them. I mean, when you get to a certain level of villainy, I'm hard-pressed to think of anyone who doesn't delight a little bit in just showing their power.
Yeah. Although, one of the things about it is that villains, for them, they're the hero, right?
The Joker knows he's not.
For many of them. Right? For Ozymandias, again, he thinks of himself as a superhero. So he's trying to do something good for others. There's when I was coming up with the definition of the superhero, and I came to pro-social and selfless, and now I'm going to say the thing that I said I was going to say. The ontological vocation of humanization. Very quickly, what is humanization? Becoming more fully human, right? I have a dog, he lays on the couch, poops in the backyard, that kind of stuff. He's great. As a dog, if I did that all day, not so much, because I wouldn't be using my potential. I wouldn't be developing my potential. That's humanization. You're becoming more and more human. Vocation, it's a calling, but it's also work. It's something that you do, but you're drawn toward it. This is why when you have a crappy job that's not developing your potential, that's not humanizing you, that is dehumanizing you, turning you into an object, that's why you don't like it. Because you have a vocation, you have a calling to do something more. And ontology is the study of reality. So anything that's ontological, cosmology, religion, it's about reality, what things are. So the ontological vocation of humanization is the kind of secular reason we're all here. We're all here to become more fully human, and we're pulled towards that. That's what superheroes do. Superheroes basically defend other people's ontological vocation of humanization, right? So they protect you so that you can go about your day doing that. Villains actively interfere with everyone else's ontological vocation of humanization. But they think they're trying to develop their own, right? They're reaching, they're doing more. But if you're damaging somebody else's ontological vocation of humanization, you're a villain.
Is this stuff true to real human nature? We talk about the villains seeing themselves as the heroes of their stories. Is that true to real world villains, the real world monsters?
Go ahead.
No, I would say generally so. Like, I mean, there's the problem with interrogating, say, like mass murderers, the few that don't kill themselves before we get them, is that they're liars and they put this narrative that serves them and that makes this a reasonable response. Likewise with racists and the like they're the people who understand this, and we're all idiots, or we all have a lie that we bought into.
Yeah. When I first heard about Osama bin Laden, I went, real world supervillain, right? Selfish antisocial mission from our perspective, from the West perspective, but from his perspective, right? He's doing something good for the world. He's superior to ordinary authorities. He's got, a massive fortune. You could say an artist whose medium is crime. The Twin Towers. In many ways, that was like a giant heist, right? Like in a heist film. He's got a mania, obsessive dedication. It's self-centered, ego, right? All those speeches, all those recorded speeches, he liked to hear himself talk. Sense of victimhood, absolutely, right? The Crusader, Invader West, and monologue and soliloquy, again, those speeches. So Osama bin Laden fits that. There was the Aum Shinrikyo. It was a cult in Japan. They poisoned the subway with, I think, ricin. Again, the same kind of self-centeredness, sense of grandiosity. And they thought, they were doing good for the world.
You mentioned the sense of victimhood. And when I go looking at people like the mass murderers and serial killers and others, that honestly seems to be the more common thing. They're mainly being the hero to themselves because they feel victimized by others.
They're reacting to an injustice.
Yeah, that seems to be more common than a sense of I'm doing what's good for others.
That's certainly, we just had a shooting with teenagers at a Maryland school where it seemed to be about my ex-girlfriend is now dating someone else. From his awful perspective, I'm sure that was, what am I supposed to do? This happened. But it's that self-centeredness where it doesn't take the next level of, there are people beyond me with their own goals and their own hardships and their own desires. And I don't get to be the end-all, be-all of everything.
Just when we go to talking about real-life monsters, real-life villains, it gets to be a harder subject, a more difficult subject matter. And I've said repeatedly, I think that's part of the popularity of this kind of fiction. We can think about some of these things through that filter of fiction and even have fun with some of the worst things in human nature.
Sure.
Because we've stepped aside from, we're still concerned about what goes on in the real world and what brings out the worst in people and trying to understand it and look at these things we fear. But just reading about the lives of those individuals over and over and over wears you out. In my forensic psychology class, I can talk about things such as children who've seen their parents murdered, people who've been victims of other things, and we do have a body of information on them. And that's such a difficult subject matter that sometimes the students will miss the point that I'm making. I can go through a class where they've signed up to take a class such as psychology and literature, comics and psychology, and I use Batman as the example. I can talk about the same things I learned about real people, and they stay with me through what we've been talking about. And I think that's been some of the popularity of comic book superheroes and villains through their entire history. Superheroes emerged when people wanted rebel heroes, because of the concern about the gangsters, and then they didn't trust the police in the 1930s.
The very first Superman story, the first scene is him showing that the police arrested the wrong man, and the criminal justice system persecuted and sentenced the wrong man to execution. And that the law failed, and he's here to show them, look, you got the wrong person, I have the right person, let's fix this. Like, that's the first thing we ever see about Superman. And then he beats up a guy beating up his wife.
But they weren't initially fighting characters that we traditionally think of as supervillains.
No.
They were fighting gangsters. We start having some mad scientists creep in, although Pete includes them in one of our 5 categories of supervillains.
Although that's the big shift in superhero comics. The most important superhero story is Action Comics #1. The second most important superhero story is Action Comics number 12 or 13. It's when the Ultra Humanite comes in. Because the Ultra Humanite, right over there, he now, before that, Superman's fighting, cars. Actually, he's fighting speeding cars and stuff like that. Here, all of a sudden, it steps outside of that. And what happens is I think it's actually Comics number 6 where Superman declares war on bad drivers. He becomes the villain, basically, because he's so full of ego and trying to stop everything. So there's this great scene in that where Superman's going around and he wrecks a car factory in the middle of the Depression and puts people out of work because they're making unsafe cars that are legal, right? But then there comes a scene where there's this guy, well-dressed man, on the phone. He has a phone in the 1930s, right? He's wealthy, and he says, someone's put my car on top of my roof. Why did Superman do that? The guy's car was probably in good shape. He wasn't driving it at the time. Superman is just going out of control. Superman busts into this radio station. Now, he could walk in through the door, but he doesn't. He goes in through the wall, and he picks the announcer up. Now, that guy's back. Then he makes this pronouncement, and then he leaves, makes another hole. He comes back later in the day to make another announcement, and you see the tuck pointer. He's literally just finished breaking up the hole. Boom! And that radio station didn't do anything wrong, right? So Superman gets out of control, and that's where Siegel and Schuster were going with him, because when he's more powerful than anybody else, and he starts to become proactive, the difference between a hero and a villain is the villain is proactive, the hero is reactive, right? The villain is taking action, the hero is trying to stop action.
Yeah, the villain is trying to change the world, and the superhero is trying to stop that change from happening.
Exactly. And so when the Ultra Humanite comes in, that gives Superman a reason to exist. That gives Superman, it pulls Superman back into society by having an outside threat.
In these stories, the superheroes tend to be reactive. They're reacting to whatever trouble someone else has stirred up. And the villains are proactive. They're taking initiative, setting the story in motion. We don't tend to trust proactive superheroes.
When superheroes become proactive, they become villains.
Well,
that's why Ozymandias is a villain.
If it goes past a certain level, because even the second Superman issue, he has a war profiteer and has a guy enlist so that he will see what military life is like and what war is like, and then asks him, what are you going to do about it? And it's the same sort of path that the X-Men take of, we're trying to show something by example, so we'd like to inspire change in others, but we are not going to force that change on you. Whereas the supervillain is, I will force that change on you. The world is not, the status is not quo, and we will make it my quo. Like, we will make it the vision I want it because I know it's right. Whereas the Superman, X-Men, even Batman to a degree, where he tries to make his symbol mean something and make sure that vigilantes hold a certain code of ethics if they operate in Gotham, is really just trying to make a change through inspiration or through example. But again, he's not taking over.
Mm-hmm.
Where does the Punisher fall? Okay, you had something?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about like when was Mark Millar exploring that idea in The Authority, right?
Yeah.
And giving us this like crew of superheroes in the Wildstorm universe who finally say like, enough, this is ridiculous. We are like, as a team, we are powerful enough that we can in fact tell the entire planet what to do. So you know what we're going to stop are like genocides in various different nations. We're going to stop wars. You all have to behave now because, right? But that takes them into supervillain land, right?
Yeah.
We tend to, particularly Americans in American culture, we don't like it when powerful people tell us what to do. Right? And what ends up happening is, as a result, like the superhero genre becomes kind of conservative, right? Superheroes are essentially reactionary, right? Not just reactive, but reactionary. And it's the supervillains who are the revolutionaries, who are trying to make these drastic changes to the world. Now, they're coded as evil because they're doing it for selfish reasons, right? Because Ozymandias, while he's trying to save the world, he's also trying to make the best joke ever and show how smart he is, right? But you don't get like kind of superheroes who are like, you know what, like, except maybe in something like Miracle Man, right? And even there, it's confused, right? Where you have, Marvel Man / Miracle Man creating this kind of utopic, perfect society. But is that okay? Do we want to be told what to do by the most, powerful person on the planet?
It's the alien daddy coming in and saying, you're all children now.
Right.
And infantilizing humanity and preventing humanity from having its own destiny.
Yeah, which again, like you'll see, the hero is someone who will understand that and will take a step back. The famous story, Must There Be a Superman, in 1970, is Superman realizing, if I help too much, then I'm a benevolent dictator.
Yeah. This is one of the things that I liked about Smallville. Smallville was the story of Clark Kent, right? To be Superman. He had all these powers. And what kept happening is he kept encountering situations in which, if he took a shortcut, a moral shortcut, like his dad took a moral shortcut and brought the Luthers to town. Somebody would get powers and would take a moral shortcut on the football field. Well, inevitably, it goes badly. And the only way you get Superman is if somebody who has that infinite power spends their whole life seeing moral shortcuts fail. That's why Superman doesn't just say, I'm doing this now. Because the moment he does that, things go wrong and he turns into the villain. The first, say, 5 seasons of Smallville are really about Clark's education that he can't take moral shortcuts. And he tries to do it. He's trying to do the right thing. Every time he takes a shortcut, by exerting his powers proactively, it goes badly.
Now, some people say, how can Superman be an inspirational character? He has godlike powers. He is an alien that removes him from us. But I think the inspirational aspect is the humanity in the alien, in that he doesn't do those things. He does the good things despite having the power to do whatever he wants. All right, where does the Punisher fall in all this?
I mean, that's where we start getting into the subcategories of anti-hero.
What is an anti-hero?
It's like the goal is basically good, but oh man, like the damage and the fact that there is a compromise of what other people would consider principles or casualties. Now, in the comics, the Punisher is in a really interesting gray area because by his own planning and also by sheer freaking luck over the years, he doesn't cause civilian casualties.
I think he once got an undercover cop.
Right. But that was such a unique, and that was the story, like, oh my god, the Punisher actually hurt someone who didn't quite deserve it on some level. So that became a big thing. But normally, and that's sort of how you justify that the cops don't try that hard to pick him up, or why the Avengers haven't stepped in and just said, look, quit it. Because he is so, he's got such blinders on and he's so determined in his mission that he is only causing casualties among the criminal elite, and also that he does have a level of who he goes after. Like, you don't see the Punisher going after purse snatchers. The one story where he did, it was revealed there's something wrong with him. Something has affected his mental state. But he doesn't bring the lethal tactics except to killers. And so it gets into this gray area where people are like, we get it. But do we want to stop him? And it gets into that weird gray area where Spider-Man and Captain America and Daredevil argue, yeah, we don't get to decide life and death. We take them to the police and a jury of the peers figures this out. And the Punisher's like, I don't care. Like, if we know they did it, if we have the evidence they did it, and they're killers, there is now fewer killers.
A friend of mine is a law professor, and she took my book and wrote a legal law school case thing, and it's the superhero dinner, right? And Hawkeye's there, he's the president of the Superhero Association, and he's drunk. And the Punisher walks in and he goes, "You're not a superhero, you're a supervillain, you're a vigilante." And then the Punisher takes him to court. And so students have to figure this out. Is he a superhero? Is he a vigilante? Is he a supervillain? Because I distinguish between superheroism and vigilantism. Superheroes are essentially freelance extensions of the police. Spider-Man webs up the villain, that guy leaves him. Spider-Man only uses the force necessary to stop someone from committing a crime, to stop someone from hurting. But he doesn't afterwards just go. The vigilante does. Vigilantism in the real world is when the person goes out, or a group of people go out, and they commit the punishment, right? That's why he's the Punisher. Because superheroism leaves the judge and jury and that executive branch part to society. So it's supportive of the ordinary methods of society. The vigilante says, "No, I'm just going to finish this myself. I'm going to inflict the punishment." There's a great short film called, I think it's Dirty Laundry. Yeah. And who's the actor in it?
Tom James.
Tom James, right? And so it's a Punisher movie, and he's got the T-shirt and stuff. And he's doing his laundry, and these bad guys are doing all kinds of crap, and they don't do anything to stop them until the end. And there's they've been beating up this prostitute, and finally it ends, and he dumps alcohol over the guy and gives the prostitute a lighter, because it's punishment. He doesn't stop the bad things from happening. He punishes the bad things. And that's what vigilantism is. And that's why it's different from superheroism. Oh, do we want to go through the types?
No, actually, we're
Okay.
a little shorter on time, which is okay. There are a lot of published lists on, before we go to audience question, there are a lot of published lists on greatest supervillains, and they publish them based on whatever they have. What would count for what we would consider as like the best example of this? Like, this is what you should talk about when you talk about supervillains. I'm going to throw out the Joker, who, by some definitions, not Pete's, is arguably the first step to supervillain. I see. Humanoid's first.
No, he's the first inverted supervillain.
Right, he's the first of that type.
Yeah.
And a lot of people consider him to be the first supervillain. Some consider it to be the ultra humanoid. And the Joker fits every aspect of the Dark Triad. You can add others. He'll invent kinds of evil. The Dark Septat or something. And the Joker knows what he's doing is wrong. He knows it's evil. We look at insanity issues of that as like the Joker's insane. Well, no, not by legal standards. He knows it's wrong.
Right.
You shouldn't do it. That's what's fun about it for him. Who else should people talk about when they're looking at those greatest supervillain lists? If quick thought, even just one name with no explanation before we go to questions.
Dark Side, Luther, even when he's interesting, he's a villain, at least past age 18. Dr. Doom, Negaduck. No, Negaduck was one of the best. Reverse Flash, usually.
Maybe just because I thought of it like the comics in my head now, but I gotta go with Kid Miracle Man.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And, that whole list, Dr. Doom, Magneto, in terms of Magneto trying to do good for the world, that list is going to be pretty much shared. And you can tell by who's appeared the most.
Red Skull.
Red Skull, yeah.
All right, I think we have 10 minutes. We end at 10 till the hour or 15?
10 to the hour.
10 to the hour. All right, we have 10 minutes for questions, comments, insults, bribes. This hand went up first.
Two quick things. We start talking about proactive, and when a hero does that, they become evil. I couldn't help but think about Age of Ultron, that discussion that Tony and Steve had on chopping the wood. Was that what you were kind of, be an example of that? And then secondly, when you talk about Superman, I was thinking about Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. I know it's a malign movie, but had it been tweaked and a little bit more money and the story stronger, it really is a good idea because he went against his principles.
Superman 4, it's a baffling movie in lots of ways, but particularly from the point you're talking about, that's one I don't hear people, Superman decides he's going to get rid of all the nuclear weapons in the world. And he announces, I'm going to get rid of all the nuclear weapons. And then people around the world are like, cool. It's like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, everyone was totally fine with this. With the white alien saying, I'm going to take all your nukes.
Yes, he has announced I'm going to be proactive, and nobody reacts to this.
So you went in, like, applauds him.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and then it's the greedy weapons manufacturers who create, they pay Luther to create a Bizarro.
Yeah, the nuclear man. Or nuclear man, as Gene Hackman kept calling him. But the other question that was asked was, in being a proactive hero, like crossing a line, like is Age of Ultron an example of that? I mean, I'd say to a degree, Tony really couldn't have foreseen that an alien gem would give his creation life in a day, but he was tampering with things, and his main thing was that he assumed that there would be fail-safes and a control over this. Like, I don't think Tony, even in the context of Age of Ultron, was ever thinking, I will control this system that will have planet-wide things. But he was trying to make it so that it could be used. He still should have checked with other people about putting those fail-safes in earlier and figuring out how this could be done that not only S.H.I.E.L.D. or America would control it. So there's definitely aspects of he definitely crossed some lines.
And he definitely got punished for it, right?
He did.
And that's the whole plot of Civil War movie.
The fact that
kind of freaking out his responsibility there.
The fact that MCU Tony is not in jail is amazing to me. Marvel Comics Tony, okay, the stories put him in lots of circumstances, but there's also a saving grace, and he doesn't go, no, MCU Tony? Holy crap, look at all the stuff he's done just in his own movies, plus Age of Ultron? No, the man's in jail.
Look, okay, we got only so much time. Other questions? Here, yes.
So on superheroes, a couple that come to mind that maybe seem to fail a little bit on the selfless side, or people like Deadpool or
Yeah, I avoided Deadpool for this whole discussion for a while.
Deadpool also changes literally with every writer that's on.
Yeah,
It's hard to get consistency with
And if anybody's interested in talking about that, because we don't have much time, I can talk to you about it afterwards. I've already had that conversation. I can have the whole conversation myself.
Yeah.
Because I'm happy to have that conversation with you, but I don't want to have that right now.
If you see me at the bar, we can talk about that.
I'm surprised Black Panther hasn't come up because
We were talking about this just beforehand.
Yeah, we should have brought up Killmonger. You talking about Killmonger? Killmonger, fascinating villain. Absolutely fascinating villain. Because his argument is solid. He's coming from a deep, real place. But again, like Magneto, it's the actions that you have to take into account. Because if he's truly as selfless as he argues, then he would have come to Wakanda beforehand. He would have brought up all these arguments beforehand. But you can see by his actions that he's doing things for selfish reasons. He is waiting for power to be in flux. He is waiting to be the person who does a certain thing after making sure that he can humiliate the current king. Just everything he does is that it's not really about the greater good that he's arguing, which is a good argument, and ultimately the Black Panther hears that, which makes him a great villain, because he has changed how the hero looks at things. But he himself is selfish. He himself is a hypocrite about his point of view.
He's only doing this because he's mad that they didn't come and collect him and they killed his dad.
That's the wound. And it's sort of the George Washington thing, right? You change the world, and then you step away. Right? Cincinnati, you step away. And in supervillains, they change the world, and they're like, and now I'm in charge. That's the difference.
Right. You had something?
It was,
Oh, it was that, okay.
That was the identical question.
Back there, let's go to the back.
so all of this discussion about what defines a supervillain, would you say it's unique to the American culture? Because a lot of it is that idea of being proactive, being bad, and that comes from our dislike of what we consider to be tyranny. But if you took a lot of these same narrative conflicts that you see between Lex Luthor and Superman, and you framed it to a different culture other than ours, other than a Western perspective, would it be easy to make Lex Luthor be the hero and Superman be the villain?
Man, I think America's the place easiest to make Luthor a hero.
Well, it's part of what makes Luthor interesting. He is emblematic of so many capitalist Western ideas of what makes a success and and especially what makes a man success. But again, he crosses that line and keeps freaking killing people. Or you know, like there's a comic where like he kills his physical fitness trainer because she humiliated him. Now that's the kind of cat Luther is, and also that if there's a failing on his part, or like a plan didn't go right, it's because other people didn't react properly. It's not his fault. Whereas Superman's like, oh, I screwed up, and I need to take things into account. The question about is that a culturally American thing? I think like superheroes in general, at least the way we do superheroes, is a very American thing. Like some of our stories don't do well in Japan because it doesn't quite gel right. The Dark Knight tanked in Japan because they're like, he's a superhero, well, where's his giant robot and where are the colors? Like, he doesn't spin when he turns on his costume. Like, what the hell am I watching?
Also, keeping your arm up between questions makes me less likely to go to you because you're blocking somebody else's cue. All right. Now, somebody's question. All right here. Let me cover up. And that's all these giving guys all the questions.
Well, you were talking about vigilantes. I was curious what you thought of the Green Arrow in the CW version, because he kind of goes back and forth on who he kills. Like they made a big deal when he killed Dave and Dark.
Yeah.
And now with the current season, with the team split, and they have the secondary team with Black Canary and her big thing about killing Black Siren. So where did they fall in the hero vigilante?
Yeah, that's
And he struggles with that in the show. How many of you seen Arrow?
and that is a tension. I mean, whenever I teach superheroes, I teach the first year of Action Comics because Superman is a vigilante. He's actually punishing people for things, and so that is a constant. You know, that's where the superhero genre gets some tension, right? It's something interesting you can do, because if they go too far, they're too proactive, when they become a villain, and so the vigilante is kind of that middle stance. And, you know, so there's still superheroes, but maybe.
I mean, it's again, I have a problem with certain characters. I don't feel like we can have a true, full, like this is how it is discussion because the writing is inconsistent. Like when Arrow season 1 came out, the idea was, and they even said in the press, he's not a superhero, this is a vigilante, we're not doing a superhero show. And there was even sort of a rule behind the scenes of, look, we'll mention certain things, but we're never going to go into like powers or something. And then season 2, Barry Allen showed up. And a dude named Solomon Grundy, or Cyrus Gold rather. And so like once you developed that this was going to be a universe where the superheroes existed, you really needed Ollie to take a step back on what kind of tactics he used, or else no, Barry's going to stop him. And I'm fine with that, and I was actually cool with how they showed his shift in morality, but it's still weird that no one really holds him accountable for the people he killed during that first year. Especially
No, that was a different Arrow.
It was a different Arrow.
He killed himself, he faked his death. That was a different Arrow.
On top of that, he was only killing the henchmen, and then he would get to their bosses, like, I'm going to give you a chance to do something better. Like, wait, the poor henchman who's like trying to just pay his damn bills, maybe his mom's in the hospital, they get killed, but this dude who's another rich white guy gets a pass? No, this is weird. This is very weird.
Okay, now your question.
I know you had to skip over the different types of villains, but this is a question for the whole panel is, what is your favorite type of villain? Would it be like, okay, the fallen hero like Sinestro to the Green Lantern Corps, or the dark parallel to the hero like Reverse Flash to regular Flash, or like just a straight megalomaniac like Dr. Doom?
Where does the Riddler fit in your categories?
The Riddler, so here's the categories. Mad scientist, right? Goes back even to Merlin, mad sorcerer. There's lots of mad scientists before superheroes. There's the monster, right? The monster's really the first one. Gilgamesh fights Humbaba, right? There's the enemy commander, Darth Vader. That goes back to, that's, you know, some ways go back to Satan, right? He's the enemy commander. The Kingpin, that's the crime lord. And there's the real person that Moriarty was based on, Adam Worth. He was a real supervillain crime lord. So the inverted superhero supervillain, which is a terrible name for it, but Hawkeye and Black Widow started out as supervillains, and then one day they went, nope, I'm going to be a hero. Sandman turned like that, right? So that's the inverted superhero supervillain is the only one native to the superhero genre. All the others pre-exist the superhero, and operate, constantly. I like the big, grandiose Ra's al Ghul, the one who has that plan to transform the world. It's Killmonger, right? He has a good idea, just not the way he goes about it isn't so good.
I mean, yeah, you go ahead. What's your favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I particularly like the kind of symmetry of the inverted supervillain. I like it when the villains kind of reflecting and reacting to, as well as kind of proactively changing the world. So I like the way that Killmonger is kind of this like reflection and inversion.
Yeah, the doppelganger.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Doppelganger. If I had taken a different path, this would have been me type of villains, whether that's the Doctor and the Master, or whether that's Barry Allen in Reverse Flash, whether that's... but at the same time, unless you're truly going to redeem this person and go that full force, I have a problem with if they make the villain so sympathetic and the hero not interesting enough. That, X-Men First Class could have just been called Magneto Was Right. They developed Magneto way too much, and Charles not at all. He was just like, but we should do this, because I'm privileged.
All right, it is time. I am at Supervillain on Twitter, Travis Langley. Where can anybody find you here at the convention? I got on a bunch of panels. I'll be signing on Sunday.
I'm doing a signing on Sunday at the Pop Culture Hero Coalition booth in the morning at 10:30. And I'm going to be wandering around the con in between that, and you can find me probably at the Mary's Bar tomorrow night. And you can find me on Twitter at Kessler, and archives of my work are at alankistler.com.
And the CAC has programs that lay out all of our programming. We're in this room all the days of the conference, or the days of the convention, and they're on that back table if you want to pick them up. If they're out, come see me, I've got more. And on the back of these programs has our website and our email address in case you want to get involved with CAC.
And if you want my book, it's out of print, but if you Google Peter Coogan Superhero PDF, there's a couple of professors who have put it up. You can just download the PDF.
Thank you all.